Hello, I'm the Smoking Cheddar, but you probably already knew that. Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're looking at the light tank. So, before we go any further, make sure your headphones are in, your other half's watching TV, you've got yourself a drink. Bear in mind it's hot out there today, guys. I've got some water. Make sure you got yourself a snack of some description. These can take a while. And as always, we'll look at the tech, we'll look at the vehicle, we'll look at the potential officers, and some scenarios and how to use them. So guys, let's go and have a look at the advanced tech tree for tanks, again. So I'm assuming that most of you were here for the helicopter and the MBT video, so this will come of no surprise whatsoever. We're looking at this one here again, special ops, when light tanks, medium tanks and main battle tanks enter combat. Their firepower is increased by 15% for 4 seconds. So there's been changes in the game, namely around a specific officer, and this is going to change a lot of how we view certain things in these deep dives and how we're going to operate with a lot of these deep dives going forwards, especially when it comes to the officers. But it's always worth remembering that your tech is an indicator into which direction you should be pushing that vehicle. And light tank, firepower. And of course, in the advanced tech tree, there is also modern fire control systems. As I have said many times before, it increases your critical strike rate by an additional 5%. So that gives you a 5% baseline for your crit rating. But it increases the critical strike damage by an additional 50%. So those critical strikes no longer dealing 150% of base damage, they're now dealing 200%. So this is quite important because these are two extremely important things when it comes to using the light tank. The light tank is not necessarily something you're going to be hitting hard with, but it is something you're going to be hitting a lot with. So slope Dharma is probably fairly relevant to you if you are looking towards a light tank to advance, because they're a bit squishy, so the damage resist bonuses provided by the slope Dharma tech is going to help you stay alive in the field. Tank pen damage. This does come in exceptionally handy when using it to counter helicopters, so this is also a tech that's worth noting. Now, as always, we're interested in the little tiny bar underneath the picture because that tells us exactly what we need to do with the vehicle. So the unit features, because this is the only faction, Liberty is the only faction that uses the light tank, the unit features are the only thing that we need to worry about. There's no faction specific. Mobility. Capable of easily darting across the battlefield to engage in guerrilla warfare. Now, what they mean is hit and run, or light striking, if you are familiar with the term of a light strike. Guerrilla warfare is not necessarily the correct term, but I think everyone understands what we're supposed to be doing here. Anti-aircraft, and of course, it can shoot at aeroplanes in the sky, which is very, very, very handy. Now we're going to look at the 8.1. We're going to look at the stats on the 8.1. Because obviously I do this mostly for silver players. Some of you who do come to this channel are in gold. That's still yeah, I'm sure I'm helping you somehow, but I fail to see how. So here we can see the firing rate is 2 seconds a shot. So it's 2 seconds a shot per visible unit. Now I don't have a light tank to show you, but I do have a tank hunter, and I do have an MBT. Eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that setup is different. So here we have 5 units in the troop, and the shot per second is individual to each unit in the troop. Each visible unit in the troop. If we scroll in, you can see each tank can be replaced by an additional 2 because it's the image multiplied by 3. So that shows you that there's 15 tanks in total, which is also down here as a number. So it's not just one shot. They all lose it at what they. It's not that they shoot all of their rounds at the same time. It's just per visible unit. Okay, that's quite important because the light tank has a very high rate of fire, which means you're constantly spitting out rounds. And this is where that tech in regards to penetration, firepower, and critical strike is fairly important. As you can see, we have a penetration rating of 149 millimeters and a troop speed of 60 with a sloped armor of 88. Now, the sloped armor is fairly irrelevant, and to be perfectly honest, so is the HP of the unit. If you are using this unit with a shield, with the exception of a singular officer, I would now inform you that I believe this to be folly. The reason being is that the shield is predominantly the shield coefficient is predominantly a derivative of the HP stat of the vehicle. The HP stat of a light tank is exceptionally low, and they do get squashed very, very, very quickly out in the open, even with shields. They're fairly resistant versus attacks from the air with a shield, but what you gain in survivability, you subsequently lose in damage output by virtue of having that shield. And it in no way benefits you in a defensive role either, once the light tank is situated inside the base. I know I had one of these, I had it at 8.0, I had a shield on it, and it just wasn't that good. It's the nature of the game. We make mistakes and we learn from them. Speaking of mistakes, yes, I am aware I made a mistake in my last video in regards to a very simple maths problem. The comment was pinned, don't tell my boss. I have to do that every day at work for 8 hours a day, and I can't believe I made a simple 25% mistake. But we'll get into that later, because unfortunately, those of you who are already sick to death of hearing about Havoc, she is going to feature in this video nonetheless, because tanks. So with 149 millimeters of penetration, you're not actually going to be able to pen an MBT, especially the one that's got the most armor, being the AMX-30, the Vanguard 8.1. And of course that also goes for the Liberty MBT, and we won't bother checking the other one. What we will check though is the helicopter. Now you'll notice the sloped armor is just enough to pen a helicopter, which is pretty important. So the light tank is supposed to counter the helicopter, in theory. We all know that with changes to the MBT, it's now more like that the MBT counters the helicopter. But what we're talking about here is an opportunity to take advantage of the rate of fire. So helicopters, again, they have relatively low HP. As you can see, this one here has 401,000. So it's got almost double what the light tank has, but you're able to fire at almost twice the rate of fire, and you're able to penetrate this target. So this is a good defensive option against helicopters. However, helicopters are better at killing most things than what they should be. So we're going to have a look at the officers, and we're going to have a look at my do's and don'ts. Obviously, When it comes to the officers, this is personal preference, and I'm going to start saying this more and more often in these videos. Just because I say it's good does not necessarily mean it is good. What works for me may not necessarily work for you, and in turn, if you have a setup that works brilliantly for you, that's good for you. This isn't a personal dig at anyone. This is just how I find the light tank works best for players like myself, and I just want to share that information with you guys. So please don't get offended when I say this officer is rubbish for this and this officer is rubbish for that, because some of you do sometimes get a little bit upset by that and say, well, you know, I think this and that Y does better, and I'm like, yeah, that's, you know, that's fine, it works good for you. Anyway, enough of the warning. We're going to crack on. We're going to eliminate officers first. We're going to eliminate any officer that has a tactical shield. What do I mean by tactical shield? Your first skill on every officer is a tactical skill, and these are tactical shields. So that's automatically eliminating Steel Fighter. We're eliminating Thorn Countess.
Think twice before
We're eliminating Uncle. We're eliminating Svalin. We're not going into the lounge officers. We don't cover them for these videos. Lounge officers, at some point I will cover them separately, but that's not going to be anytime soon. We're also not going to cover Guardian of Truth. I've spoken about this guy at length, and this is probably the only time I will ever give the caveat of, if you've spent money on awakening him, I apologise. I will never agree with anyone who says he is a good officer. He is trash. Sorry. That's even with the warning, don't bother talking to me about this officer. I hate him. Maybe Cheddar, he does really good. We're also going to eliminate Vox for this, because Vox's tactical skill does not deal any damage. It is a defensive skill. Doesn't provide a shield, but it is a defensive skill. We're going to eliminate Death Adder on the basis that his damage output with his tactical skill is just simply too low. We're eliminating Sergeant Spanner. Sergeant Spanner is not a good officer.
I need a partner.
Normally,
Someone I can rely on.
I eliminate him because I say it's not fair to talk about him if you're now joining the game because he was a limited officer. You can't get him anymore. However, the amount of you that keep asking me about Warrior Wiz, he is my favourite officer in the game. He is exceptionally versatile, so we will be covering him going forwards on these deep dive videos. So I figured what better place to start than we'll start with my favourite officer, Warrior Wiz. Now, what would he bring to the table for the light tank? Well, when it comes to the light tank, we know we're using the critical strike bonuses that are provided by the tank tech tree. We know we're using the firepower bonuses, and as always, I will remind you guys every time I bring this up, firepower increases rate of fire, accuracy, and damage. So we're looking for things that we can apply via the tank, because the light tank has fairly low damage output and it has a fairly low penetration rating. So in many regards, it's better to look at debuffs we can apply to the enemy target. And because his tactical skill, once he's awakened, is upgraded, we'll just look at that straight away, and that will give you a 15% damage resist debuff lasting 4 seconds and a total coefficiency of 1800. We're not really interested in the coefficiency too much, and we're not too interested in any of the tactical skills. we'll get into that later, but we're really interested in are the special abilities, because these often get triggered on hit. So we've obviously got a 15% chance here for Master Hacker to go off. Whenever this officer's troop attacks an enemy ground force troop, it has a 15% chance of resetting the target's load time and prevents them from attacking for 1 second, and can be triggered every 8 seconds. Now, you're firing one shot with, I believe, 6 tanks every 2 seconds, which means you're probably getting off about 3 shots a second, give or take, depending on how those shots are staggered, as we saw with the tanks earlier. Which means you're probably going to get about 1 or 2 seconds into a fight before this triggers. Give or take, you've got about 2 seconds before this triggers. Now that can be handy in disabling a helicopter, it can be handy in disabling a tank, but it's only going to last for 1 second, and then it is going to reset for 8 seconds on that target. So it's not something we can rely on, but it is something we can use. We also have, very importantly, damage intensity bonuses. Now I'll get to why the damage intensity bonuses are important towards the end of the video. I do keep skipping over this, and I really should be doing something a little bit more towards damage intensity, and we'll explain it towards the end. Another really good officer is Golden Eagle. Yes, I know in my officers videos I've always said Golden Eagle is selfish, you know, we should move away from him. That's only because everyone got so hung up on using him on the helicopters, and I was trying to break that cycle of we must only use him on helicopters. He has so much more to offer to light tanks, main battle tanks, as well as helicopters and anti-tank guns, that just focusing him in one specific area, I feel, is a disservice. Here you can see I have him on an anti-tank gun, so I don't think he's actually that bad. I think he's a pretty good officer. Now, the reasons why we might want to have him on a light tank is obviously because we get the damage resist buff that's applied to the base as well as the unit. Again, we're getting a critical strike rating for this officer, which is exceptionally good. We're also getting a damage intensity buff, which is, when paired alongside other officers with damage intensity, very, very spicy indeed. But also, we're getting a damage resist ignore stat, which can stack with Warrior Whiz. Now, do I think these two should go together? That depends entirely on factors that you have. Mainly availability of units, availability of officers, and whether or not you are suffering from power sickness and you need to overhaul your entire army, or whether or not these two are laying around and the tank is laying around. So I'm not going to say this is the most optimal setup. I am going to say that for a light tank, that's going to really hurt anything on the ground, and it's going to absolutely decimate anything in the sky. The added bonus is obviously Eagle's tactical skill deals more damage versus armoured targets, so you are going against a helicopter, you are going to get a bonus of 30 skill damage coefficient, which isn't a lot, admittedly. Sorry, not 30, because that's at level 1. We always talk in terms of awakened officers. And it's still not a great deal, but it is better than nothing, and it will make or break the ability. It will make or break a fight, let me put it that way. Other exceptionally good officers, obviously Rapier himself, he gets bonus firepower by virtue of being on a light tank. That goes up to 50%. So I talk about Rapier quite a lot, and that is because Rapier, when you have the advanced tech for tanks, he's exceptionally deadly because he works all around critical strike rating, critical strike bonuses, and of course his awakened ability. When you deal critical strikes, you get free damage coefficient. But more importantly, he gets things like normal attack boost, which increases, if we just open it up here, additional damage modifier applied to ground or air force units, normal attacks. This stat is countered by the normal attack resilience buff. So it's another one similar to damage intensity and damage resist buffs. So we can apply him almost certainly to a light tank in pretty much any scenario. Now again, that comes with a caveat of how many different types of tank or helicopter are you running, and do you have this officer free? This is a very difficult question to ask, and it's a very difficult question for me to answer, because without looking at an individual setup, I can't say, hey, 100% use this, 100% use that. This video right now is going to be aimed at you guys trying to make the best informed decision with what you have available in your arsenal. So this guy is definitely up there, and we'll get to scenarios as to why rate of fire is particularly useful for a light tank shortly. Of course, we're going to talk about Madam Havoc. I know you guys are sick about hearing about her already. Everyone and their dog has done a video on Madam Havoc, and yes, that is because Madam Havoc is completely broken. There is no scenario in which you should not be having this officer in your lineup, hence why I've dropped one artillery gun to go and build a helicopter so I can use this officer. This officer will change how tank battles are fought, plain and simple. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but we're also looking at here is things like Ruthless Outlaw, because we're getting a free damage resist buff of up to 30%. We're getting a damage intensity buff of 20%. We're getting exceptionally high damage coefficient, which is then boosted by 25%. For 2,250, I can add up. By virtue of being on a light tank. Now, I did say earlier on that the damage coefficient for the light tank is not something that you really should be worrying about. And that is true, it isn't. The reason for that is, realistically, the only scenarios in which a light tank ever really gets a coefficient damage off is extended fights, base fights, or shooting at aircraft, or in a defensive role. So you don't really need to skimp out on the damage coefficient, but it's not a high priority. The damage coefficient on a light tank is not a high priority. Things that are a high priority are rate of fire, so firepower, damage intensity, and critical strike. She doesn't provide us with any critical strike, but if you do have other tanks that you're happy with, you do need to put her on. She needs to go into your lineup somewhere. War Machine. This is going to be one of those rare occasions where I suggest War Machine. Now, again, damage coefficient is particularly low, but he has damage intensity, he has firepower, but more importantly, he has a special skill we're after, which reduces the load time by 10%, which means your 2 seconds per shot now go down to 1.8. Again, when you're dealing with critical strikes and you're dealing with penetration damage, the more shots you can put in, the better. Now, he doesn't give you any critical strike, but when you pair him with the likes of Rapier's going to pull most of the weight for giving you the critical strike rating of around 35 to 45%, depending on the additional trainings you're doing and whether or not the tactical skills have been deployed. So it is going to make a difference. He's a good one to have. And the chances are you already have him awakened. Say you're looking at bringing in a new officer that's only at skill level 1 across the board and level 30, so it's a good aid. You've probably got him awakened, you've probably got him at level 60 by now, which means that you can just use him until you can afford to replace him by using another officer that's now going to deal more damage. So he's a really good intermediate officer, so don't worry. You know, you're not going to keep him on the light tank. He will get replaced. But if you're just bringing the light tank in and you need to get the damage out, it's better than, it is genuinely better than nothing. It's better than having a skill level 1 officer by a mile. Speaking of which, Winter Huntsman, almost the same, except he's a little bit harder to get because you only get his statues, his personal statues from an L4. I'm in no rush to get all of his statues because I'm never going to use him. However, he does stun the target for 2 seconds once he is awakened on the ground, and he does deal 1350 damage coefficiency. And he does give us a firepower boost. But that's pretty much the only things that are really going for him. So unless you're going to use the light tank as a utility style support tank, where you're stunning the target on the ground, which means you need to get the damage coefficient out, then this is kind of a wasted option, but it's still an option. And again, if you've got only several officers available to you, and they're all skill level 1 with the exception of him, he is better than nothing. He will deal damage coefficiency higher than a skill level 1 officer, but he is quickly replaced. Now, while Valkyrie is going to get an honourable mention here, she isn't going to stay on the list for any longer than she has to, and that's because rapid reload only works on tank hunters and helicopters. It does not work on tanks. But this skill, if you do have her awakened, is going to produce a lot of damage. So whenever this officer's tank or helicopter troop attacks an enemy ground force troop, the attack has a 20% chance to break the target's defense for 4 seconds, reducing the target's damage resist by up to 20%, and can be triggered every 2 seconds. The reason why this is important is because when she is awakened, that skill gets expanded. Whenever this officer's tank or helicopter troop attacks an enemy ground force troop, the attack has a 40% chance to break the target's defense for 4 seconds, reducing the target's damage resistance by 20%, and can be triggered once every 2 seconds. If the target is already affected by the defensive break, this skill instead deals damage to the target as damage coefficiency of 200. You have an exceptionally high rate of fire. This is going to be going off a lot. And I'm not entirely positive, but I believe it can be trained in if she is awakened. Don't quote me on that, because I've never tested it. But it clearly states that this skill can, Who Dares Wins, can be trained, because it is a special skill, and this skill can be awakened. Now, to my knowledge, there is nothing to say that we can't use an awakened officer to train this skill in if she seems, for whatever reason, to not be in your rotation at this moment in time. But let's be honest, if you're running a helicopter, you're probably running her. So let's not worry too much about that. Lady of Justice is an exceptionally good officer for your light tank. There are multiple reasons for that, and they only get better as time goes on. So the tactical skill, yep, okay, it does 1500 damage coefficiency, but it reduces the target speed, which is exceptionally handy if you're trying to get out of dodge, because you have the fastest tank on the field, but you also have the weakest tank on the field. So you can trigger the coefficiency and then you can just run away. You do get bonus firepower of 30%, and it goes up by an additional 5% if you're inside friendly territory, which means this light tank, when it's moving around the battlefield, is going to have a very high rate of fire, it's going to have a very high accuracy, and it is going to get little damage boosts from that. You're going to get 15% critical strike rating. Again, we're looking for things that we can trigger constantly because of the rate of fire and the damage being so low. So critical strike rating is really what we want to be building the light tank towards, or debuffing the target, or buffing ourselves through chance on hit abilities. We do also get a damage resist buff, which is quite nice. It's 20%, I'm not going to lie. And of course, once she's awakened, the tactical skill is also going to increase your troop speed by an additional 15%, but as well as that, it's going to increase your damage intensity by 15%. So that's pretty nice. Now we're going to cover the only shield officer I would put on the light tank. Oh, I didn't say earlier, we're not covering these two either. So, Whipcracker. When she's awakened upon entering combat, she is going to give you a shield, which is exceptionally handy for that light tank. Now, I know I said shields aren't going to really do anything for that light tank, and they're not. But this is a free shield, so let's not wet ourselves too much over its capabilities, but it will give you an edge. Not only that, you are getting bonus damage resist when the tactical skill goes off in a head-to-head fight, which the light tank should not be in, let's be fair. We're getting HP and damage resist buff. This is not particularly useful for the light tank, although it is in a way to a degree. We're getting a troop speed increase. This is useful, as well as a training speed increase. We're also getting skill damage reduction, which is kinda useful. Now, in terms of scenarios, we've spoken about the officers. In terms of scenarios, bear in mind the description of the unit is a guerrilla unit, which basically means you're going to be using it as a light strike unit or a hit and run unit. You're going to be using it to flank the enemy and to attack artillery pieces at the rear, enemy reinforcements and resupply. You're going to be using it to plink off things that are driving past your base. All units have to stop to fire, so does the light tank, but the light tank's better at it because it can move faster than anything else. It can get in range, it can fire a few shots, and then it can move again. So, other things the light tank can do really well is pop out of the base, target a unit, and then pop back in the base before anyone knows what's happened. This is really good at taking out artillery. I've seen it happen. It's happened to my own artillery. So, yeah, if you have the light tank tricked out for crit and firepower, it's going to hurt artillery a hell of a lot. It's going to crush them in 1 or 2 hits, and that's what you want. The light tank is not supposed to be used as a bludgeoning tool like the MBT, or it's not supposed to be used as a surgical tool like the helicopter, where you're striking at tanks or other helicopters or things in group formations. The light tank is designed to either be put in an exceptionally large AG, where its only job is to shoot at enemy aircraft and occasionally scare off the odd individual unit, or it's designed to be manipulated. It's designed to be micromanaged. So if you're in a battle, you're online and you're donating troops, and that's all you're doing is just, I'm just refilling my artillery, I'm just refilling my helicopter, I'm just refilling my MBT. That's all you're doing. Have a light tank. Give yourself something else to do while you're doing that. Okay? You're going to be more useful to your alliance if you're micromanaging a light tank and you're able to skirt around combat and shoot at aircraft, or you're able to shoot at incoming enemy reinforcements, or you're able to shoot at the artillery without them noticing, pop in and out of your base, things like that. These are really good vehicles for that, and the amount of people I hear them say, I've got a light tank, but it's really bad. And I'm like, well, how are you using the light tank? They go, oh, well, I'm just a defensive player. It's probably not for you. The light tank is a pinnacle of field play. How you're supposed to use the light tank is you're supposed to visually identify targets that you can defeat very quickly. You're supposed to drive to those targets, defeat them, and drive away. You're not hanging around waiting for another fight. If you hang around and wait for another fight, someone's going to turn up with a helicopter or a tank, and they're going to absolutely destroy you. When AGs are attacking bases, you can sneak them in and shoot at the back of AGs, and quite often you will get away with it. if the person in charge of the artillery or in charge of the tank or the light AG is not paying attention, an individual light tank can cause a hell of a lot of damage. So don't think, oh, you know, my damage output is low, the HP is low, it's a rubbish unit. It's not. The chances are you aren't using it correctly, because I've used it and I can tell you now, I've been through a few officers on it, and if you sneak that unit around and you're picking off reinforcements, it's a very, very good tank. Very good tank. And this brings us into damage intensity. So what is damage intensity? Well, I like to describe it as this. And this is not 100% accurate, but it's a good way of understanding what damage intensity is. So if you have like 110 damage intensity and they have 90 damage resist, their damage resist is lower, so your damage intensity is going to have a 20% gap, which means your damage is going to effectively not be negated by that 20%. You're going to effectively give yourself a 20% damage boost. So the higher your damage intensity, the more damage each individual shot can do, because you're going to have a bigger gap between the damage resistance, and the bigger that gap, the less that damage resistance is effective, if that makes sense. The other way to think about it is on the other foot, whereas if you have a higher damage resistance, you're going to be able to resist that percentage difference more in incoming damage from the attacker's damage intensity. So if you have 110% in damage resistance and they only have 90% in damage intensity, then you're going to be dealing a 20% reduction in incoming damage. Okay, so that's kind of how the damage intensity system works, which is why I said we've got to look out for damage intensity quite heavily. Now, if we're using the tank tech tree to its fullest, we're going to be targeting firepower, penetration, and various other upgrades to try and max it out as high as possible. And we're going to be looking towards officers like Rapier to give us that extra boost of firepower. But once we've done that, we need to be really, really considering investing in damage intensity and how we can maximize our damage intensity potential, which is why I suggest quite heavily Rapier and Lady of Justice, because if you are in a situation where you are getting your tactical skills off, you are going to increase your damage intensity on that light tank. So this makes it very good in a defensive role in that scenario. Also makes it very good in terms of shooting down aircraft, because you're constantly shooting. The tactical skills go off, which does affect aircraft. And you're then going to increase your damage intensity further, and then you can train in damage intensity more. So obviously you could use Havoc. She gives you a nice 20% increase in damage intensity. And we're looking to use damage intensity to overwhelm the artillery. So that's why we're wanting damage intensity, it's why we want critical strike rating, it's why we want firepower. It's why we want these three stats. We're not worried about the coefficients. We're not worried about the coefficiency damage. Yes, you are going to deal coefficiency damage, but that's not your main goal. Your main goal is to drive up to the enemy target, shoot at the enemy target, and drive away. If you are there for 8 to 10 seconds, you are going to utilize your tactical skills. And at that point, you want your tactical skills to be dealing even more. You want to be able to really increase things like damage intensity, critical strike rating, which is why Rapier is a good option, because once he's awakened, you're going to be able to increase your stacks on the target, and then it pops off every critical strike. And of course the coefficiency gives you critical strike rate, and as I said, you know, we're getting damage intensity from Justice. Is that the best option? Probably not. So if you have a light tank, consider your targets. Consider how quickly you can get to those targets. Consider, can you cut off any resupplies, any reinforcements. If you are one of those people that go after resource trucks, they're not going to get away from you very easily. So again, light tank is a good option. And of course, if someone tries to bomb your base and you've got a light tank in there with 2 damaging officers, they're going to know about it. Problem is, they won't know about it until you've splashed all of their bombers. Sucks to be them, I guess. So there you go. That's everything I think I can share about the light tank. Just a quick recap. We're not looking at coefficiency damage, we're looking at intensity and critical strike rating, and debuffs that we can apply through special abilities, or special abilities that give us a buff in attacking. We're looking at weak targets, we're looking at resupply targets, we're looking at moving around the battlefield and picking off the enemies. We're not looking at going toe to toe like we do with MBTs or with helicopters. We're not looking at line battles, we're looking at moving, maneuver warfare, light striking. We're looking at being able to flank our opponents and really hurt them and punish them for not paying attention. That's what this tank is all about. Punish someone for not paying attention. You do that, you'll make a name for yourself with this little puppy. Trust me. People remember when they get absolutely dunked on by a light tank. As always, a link will be available below in the description box to come and join the absolute degeneracy that is my Discord channel. Feel free to @ me with questions in there, or just come say hi, or if you see us playing a game in voice chat, drop in and say hi, but make sure you've got headphones and a microphone. I don't want to hear the dishwasher going while you're cooking dinner just because you're on your phone. You know who you are. Also, if you don't give the rules a pizza, you scroll down to the bottom, click the little pizza symbol. If you don't give the rules a pizza, you will get mocked because you won't be able to see the rest of the Discord channels. So, come and join in the fun, come and join in the party, come say hi. It's a great place for random video games, not just Warpath, but anything else, memes, degeneracy, and generally people just having fun. I've been the Smoking Cheddar. You've been probably bored by now, so have a good rest of your day, and don't forget to drink water. It's hot out there.